Counter-Narrative News brings you daily news today on Thursday the 4th of May 2023. Going straight to New York in a tragic incident of brutality, racist brutality and anti-poor brutality on a Manhattan metro train. Jordan Neely, of 30 years old, who is currently homeless but has been for years a public performer, busking as it were, doing mostly Michael Jackson impersonations and dancing, was killed when he seemed to be in an agitated state, shouting for food and housing and being frustrated. He was then put in a chokehold by three men led by a former US Marine, a white person, and after 15 minutes he lost his life. Of course, there's a racist backlash in trying to justify the killing of such a poor and someone suffering such mental health challenges, and they're trying to justify the attack on him and his death. On the part of the grassroots, they've been protesting in the subway and stopping metro trains, denouncing the New York mayor that's Eric Adams, who's imposed a brutal regime on the citizens of New York, further violently criminalizing anyone who's not paying their full fare, continuing, of course, on the gentrification and the military policing of people in that state and in that city. Our solidarity and love to Jordan Neely's family and friends. No one deserves to die like that, and it's very important that people act out their positive humanity in public spaces and places as much as they can, because the public space is a realm of struggle between the forces of resistance pushing back this dehumanization and the forces of dehumanization and oppression themselves. In an interesting anecdote, when I was helping to put on the event last Monday of the Jessica Huntley Community Garden, outside a white car driver was abusing a West African heritage ticket inspector who had put a ticket on his car because he was parked, obviously, where he shouldn't be. Of course, one can sympathize with the frustration of the driver. We're all under pressure financially, and no one appreciates another £60 being taken out of their pockets. However, the person was just being very abusive to the ticket inspector, borderline racist, aggressive behavior. And I was trying to sympathize with the driver and calming it down, but also stating very firmly it's unacceptable in the way he's talking to this colleague, dishing out the tickets, and also trying to come to the assistance of the colleague who was the ticket inspector. I know from my casework professional background that ticket inspectors who are disproportionately West African heritage receive a massive amount of racist abuse and aggression in their work, and that's just totally unacceptable. But the point of this anecdote, while I was doing this, then there was a youngster who must have been in his late teens, not older than 20, a young person of color, male, who was filming this abuse that this ticket inspector was getting by this white man. And I was intervening, obviously. And then he starts to have a go at me, saying, if they want to argue, and there wasn't an argument, it was the ticket inspector being abused, but he said, if they want to argue, let them argue. And he was filming on his phone all the time, and obviously he was filming to get social media clout. And I was in his mind, doing the wrong thing, or trying to de-escalate this on the high street. Again, it just shows that, we really got to challenge those who are going down this road of toxic dehumanization of racism. To continue, the Moscow leadership is continuing to face its fallout on the drone attack on the Kremlin. Many voices are saying actually it could have been a setup by the Russian authorities themselves to justify a further escalation of their military operation of colonial invasion, occupation and annexation of their small neighbor Ukraine. The Russian military effort is going nowhere, and it's gone nowhere for many, many, many months. It's becoming increasingly difficult for the Russian leadership to justify this military campaign going forward. And it's quite interesting, isn't it, if you think that the drone was shot down in a quite well shot piece of video that also showed the just coming military parade decoration just in front of the Kremlin building. So it does seem like it would, if it was the Russians doing it themselves to justify their strategies, it does kind of fit quite well into that. Anyway, it's an interesting situation, and of course the Russians have responded by killing a whole bunch of civilians, particularly in Kherson, in which 23 have been killed attacking different civilian infrastructure there. Going to Sudan, the conflict continues between the two supremacist violent forces of the Sudanese army led by Burhan and the rapid support forces, so-called, led by Hemedti. It's interesting, Saudi is kind of hedging its bets and supporting both sides, so is the UAE. Sisi, the leader of Egypt, is leaning towards Burhan, but it's an interesting situation. I mean, notwithstanding the terrible consequence of the people of Khartoum, more than 550 dead, thousands have fled. It's airstrikes, destabilization, and there's no end in sight to this. But it's interesting because why has this violence erupted? On the one hand, it's helped to neutralize the Sudanese people's grassroots resistance, demanding a political say in the running of their country and trying to use their natural resources for the upliftment of the Sudanese people and not for its global, regional and ruling class looting. So there's that. There's also, it shows that there is no global power that's going to come to the defense in any way of the oppressed people of the global south, and you can see this in Sudan. And so it's a sad situation there, but also look at the Western powers here, manipulating the situation, and then the condition on their political support for some of the protest movement in Sudan is for them to remain peaceful. How can you remain peaceful in such a situation of total violence? There needs to be at least self-defense, one could argue, but of course, a peaceful non-cooperation strategy, it can be a part of the tactics. But the Western neo-colonial interests want to keep the Sudanese grassroots weak and tied to their own funding and their political patronage. Finally, going over to Colombia, the president of Colombia, who himself is a former member of a guerrilla movement that's now has been demobilized, the M19, is encouraging the Spanish colonial state to remove the National Liberation Army, one of the longest-standing revolutionary workers and peasants armies in Colombia, to remove it from the list of terrorist organizations. One just cannot really understand why there is this, in this particular global left culture, not all radical and global left cultures, but in this particular one, why would a leftist president who's come out of a revolutionary guerrilla movement himself, knowing that the right wing, I mean the very violent right wing, will come back to rule the Colombian state, why would you then encourage the disarmament of the only real comparative power that the poorest peasants have in the so-called peace process? Very strange. Counter-Narrative News wishes everyone a fantastic day. Please continue to support us by encouraging your friends and networks to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on Twitter at @counter_CNN. We wish you a fantastic day. Thank you.